We were about 10,000 feet on our way home after strafing, and I was number one, and your number two wheezed behind you, and I was flying straight and level. Suddenly there was lots of what we call big, fat, oily jobs. You know, they were blobs of smoke from the exploding shells, anti-aircraft fire, and we used to say you could get out and walk on it, you know. And they got me just right in front of the engine, underneath the engine, and suddenly the wings were like graters, you know, jagged holes in them where the motor had taken the shrapnel and the rest of it had gone through the wings. And of course there was smoke everywhere. I couldn't see where I was going. And I thought, well, I've just got to get out of here no matter where I was. We were just over the lines, actually. I could have glided a bit more, but I was frightened the thing was going to blow up. And I must have left the aircraft at about 8,000 feet. And then suddenly everything's dead quiet. The silence is quite something, because suddenly everything's quiet, you know. But then I could hear rifle fire going off, and I thought, gee, I hope this is not for me. And anyway, I landed on the side of a hill, and then I could see all the German troops rushing up to me with Tommy guns and that. And I dived into a bush to try and hide from them, but of course it was silly. And I used to smoke heavily at that time. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a last cigarette before they sort of finish me off. And I lit up a cigarette in the bush and had a quick smoke. And then I heard them say, "Come out, Englander." Of course, we were all Englishmen to them. "Come out, Englander." And out I went, and hands are up, and then what they said to everyone that I spoke to afterwards, "For you, the war is over." That's the first thing they said. And then there's the short little guy. I think I said it in my story. It's always the short little guys that cause all the trouble. And he thought I had a pistol, a little gun, a little Smith & Wesson revolver, and he thought I'd thrown it down somewhere, and he wanted to know where it was. He wanted it as a sort of loot. I said, "I haven't got one. I don't carry one. Nine pistol." Oh, and he started threatening me, and then I think he was going to start beating me up. And then a Feldwebel came running up and gave him a good choking off in German, when they can really choke you off in German, eh? And he really did. And then he asked me, he called me sir, because it was June the 27th, 1944. They were getting pushed back all the time, and I think he could see the writing on the wall. So he was very servile and humble, and he said, "Do you need any medical attention?" and all this sort of thing, which I couldn't believe after this guy had been threatening me. So he said, "You're sure you're all right?" Meantime, my one flying boot with the chute jerking open, I'd lost a flying boot, had flown off, so I had one flying boot and just a sock. And there were a lot of Italian partisans operating then, and they must have killed one, because they gave me an old pair of Italian boots to wear, which were very uncomfortable, but they did me until I got to the real camp, the Luftwaffe, and they treated me quite well, shifting me from unit to unit, moving me back, I suppose, under guard with Tommy guns. And I had dinner with a German colonel. I think he was their equivalent of a colonel. He had a brilliant 10, I think they called it. He had an iron cross, but it wasn't an iron cross. It was the one that you hang around, the nice cross, hang around your neck. But of course he couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak German, so all I was interested in was the food because I was hungry, you know. And but it was I must say the Germans treated me well. Of course they knew they were losing the war, and they must say they treated me quite well. And they sent me to the interrogation center where they interrogated us, and they put me in a little cell. It was the length of a bunk, and there was only the space next to the bunk, that much. And that's all there was, and a little window at the top, a barred window, and they just left me there for 5 days. And you know, there's nothing worse than after the life in a fighter squadron where the camaraderie was wonderful and everyone was pulling each other's legs and joking and laughing and talking. And, you know, it was terrible. And after 5 days of this, they handed us a little slice of bread. If you wanted to go to the toilet, you had to pull a lever down above the entrance doorway, and that dropped the signal out in the corridor, and you were taken to the toilet, and then you were brought back, and I could hear what the others were saying. One American, I think I said in my story that as they took our boots away from us every night. For why, I don't know. But we had to put them outside the door. They opened the door. And I heard an American, when he put his door, he says, "Shine 'em up, boys, shine 'em up." And it was quite something to hear that. And after then I went for an interrogation. And the first thing the guy did was offer me a smoke, a cigarette, a player's cigarette. Gee whiz, I couldn't grab that cigarette quick enough. I was dying for a smoke, you know. And anyway, I had a smoke and I said, "No, according to the rules of war, I'm only supposed to give you my name, rank and number." He says, "Yes, man, I know that." But he says, "Look, have another cigarette, you know." And they were buttering you up all the time. And I said, "You know, I'm sorry, but I'm only got to give you my name, rank and number." He said, "Oh, man." He said, "Look," he says, you from one squadron, your OC is Major Johnny Seckham," and he told me all that. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. Anyway, well, you know, I thought, well, what the hell are you asking me for? And anyway, they waited until they had a lot of chaps, and then they put us on a train that was flattened, that had been bombed, and there was one line left, and they were waiting to board this train to take me to Sargen, where Stalag Luft III was. And the German civilian, he could see, I had two guys with Tommy guns guarding me, and he could see that I was. You know, I had wings on it. And he said, he came and he could speak broken English, and he was telling me about the V2s. And of course, we hadn't even heard about the V1s. And here he was telling, it goes 70 kilos into the sky, rockets, he says, and it come down, he says, and it goes to London, he says, we're going to wipe London out. And I laughed at him, I said, rubbish. Meanwhile, they were dropping these things on London, these V2s. And I laughed at him because we, you know, in the squadron in Italy, we hadn't even heard about them. When I got to Stalag Luft III with this old Italian boots on, they issued me, they had Red Cross clothing there. We had great coats, proper British Army boots, which were wonderful after the old high-tie ones I had. And they rigged me out, except I still had my battle dress. And, it was... I got there in March after they'd shot those 50 guys, and they were wearing black diamonds on their sleeves. And I asked them, the old chaps, what's this black thing on for? And then they told me about, the Great Escape. And because we hadn't heard of it in the squadron. First of all, put me in a run of Polish chaps, Poles that were flying with the RAF. And they were such gentlemen. They were really first-class guys, but they couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Polish, And anyway, the South Africans organised that I went into a room of South Africans, and I had to get permission from the Germans to move the bungalow, and I went in with the South Africans, and the main chap was a chap named Polly Turon. He was from Bethlehem in the Free State, Polly Turon. And he was shot down in the desert. He'd been there since 1941, I think. And he was very bitter, and he was friends of Loftus and all those guys, and they were now colonels and that, and he was still a lieutenant sitting in Germany, And he was very annoyed about that. He wasn't he wasn't a nice guy at all, really. And there was Ronnie Steele, Vic Mundell, Charles Southwood. Used to lie with his face against the wall all the time, and life went on. And then we started the march on the 28th of January. They said, "Rouse, out you go." The Russians were advancing. Sargon was in Eastern Germany. It used to be Poland. But when I was there, it was called Germany. And the Russians were coming, and on the 28th of January, we roused out at 10 o'clock, midnight, we were on the road. They had to grab a few food parcels, and we were, of course, the Red Cross sent us food parcels. Well, it was snowing and hailing and ice. We were dragging boxes along the ice with string, which we managed to put a bit of food in, and dragging boxes along. It wasn't very pleasant in January, and we got to a place that I can't remember the name, but we were loaded into cattle trucks. After 2 or 3 days of marching, we were loaded into cattle trucks and taken across. Somebody told me after the war that we were only in those cattle trucks for one night, but I'm sure it was 5 nights we were in, because we went right across Germany to the western side of Germany, and a place called Darmstadt, and we were in a disused naval camp, and we were lucky. At least we had a roof over our heads, and the weather started warming up, and it got a little better. Our food parcels started catching up with us, and we could eat a little bit. But this is hunger all the time. This is a terrible hunger. The Germans still marched us further northwest, and we ended up in Schleswig-Holstein, I think it was, near Lübeck. That's when the British Second Army caught up with us. And this one armoured car came driving up the road. We were in a beautiful country estate, and we didn't want to run away or anything, because we wanted all to be together when we were released. And this British armoured car came gradually, slowly up the road. And of course we knew it was the British Army because we knew we had a secret radio going in Germany, which was kept in the ceiling of the bungalow, and they used to listen to the BBC News, and then they would come around during the day to each bungalow with a guard, with a Kriegi as we called ourselves, and they used to read the news, particularly where the army was. So we knew that the British Army was up the north. The guys just went mad. They just swarmed over the thing. You couldn't see it for bodies shouting and screaming and clapping and cheering and doing all sorts of stupid things, and that was when the British Second Army caught up with us, and then we had to wait a week before we flew out, and we were allowed to roam the countryside, and that's when I learned to speak a bit of German. I was able to say "Haben Sie ein Kartoffeln," which means "Have you got a potato?" And we used to scrounge a bit of food, from the civilian population. We had a chap, John Stewart, he got to EFTS, that's Elementary Flying Training School. He was in Flight 4, where I started, and we had Elementary Flying Training School, EFTS, which was Tiger Moss, and then we spread out. Those who were going to be bomber pilots went to bomber SFTS, Service Flying School, and those who were going to be fighters went to different ones, and they sort of split us up. And I hadn't seen him since then, and I bumped into him in London on the Strand, and he had his cap on the back of his head, and he was swaying in the breeze. He was right up to here, old John Stewart. And I said to him, "What are you doing in London?" He said, "Oh, I've come to fly you guys back to the Union." I said, "Jingo, we thought there were about 3 or 4 of us together." We looked at each other, we said, "We don't want this guy to fly us back there." So we decided to come by ship, and we ended up on the SS Alcantara, and it took us 2 weeks, of course, to get from Liverpool. It left Liverpool and came down and called in at Freetown and then Cape Town.